Good evening, this is Christine Brenneman, and tonight I'm going to read you The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. This story happened to be one of the favorites of my children when they were little, and I hope you enjoy it too. Once upon a time there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandy bank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella, and she went through the woods to the baker. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. Oh dear. First he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes, and then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of the cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees and planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving his rake, calling, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he didn't listen to him. He lost them. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster. So I think he might have gotten away altogether if he had not unfortunately ran into a gooseberry net and got caught by a large button on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and began to shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon top of Peter, but Peter wiggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden beneath the flower pot. He began turning them over, looking under each. Presently Peter sneezed. "Kerchoo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. He tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out the window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright. He had not the least idea which way to go. He was very damp with sitting in that can. After a while he began to wander about, going limpity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in the wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little bunny to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans for her family in the woods. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Mr. McGregor filled his watering cans. A white cat was sitting staring at some goldfish. She was very, very still. Her tail was twitching as if it was alive. Peter thought it would be best to go away without speaking to her. He heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close, he heard the scrape of a hoe. Scratch, 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 scratch. Peter scurried underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions, his back turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Ooh. Peter got down very quickly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go along the straight walk behind the black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but he did not care. He slipped under the gate and was safe at last in the woods outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for the scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked back behind him until he got home in the big fir tree. He was so tired he flopped down in the nice soft sand floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea. She gave him a dose of it to Peter, 1 spoonful to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end.